The biggest tragedy of Kendall Roy goes beyond any specific event that happened to him. The biggest tragedy of Kendall Roy is the fact that he didn't need to live the way that he did. Kendall's pursuit of business was shaped by a promise by his dad that he would succeed him as the head of Waystar Royco. Keep in mind, his dad was a notoriously inconsistent person throughout his life, but since he was only 7, Kendall latched on to his dad's words. That promise would become the defining statement of his life. Kendall chose to find hope in something outside of reality because he couldn't find hope inside of it. His dad was neglectful and emotionally, to Roman even physically, abusive, while his mother was an absence and a deeply selfish person. He was never provided with the supposedly unconditional love his parents were meant to give him, and so he clinged on to something else that was fixed, a dream. When I say fixed, I don't mean in the sense that it was destined to come true, although Kendall absolutely believed that it would. It was more so fixed in the sense that he could look forward to it every day with the same conviction, and it would shape the course of his life. As he matured, he tried to find love in other ways, but it was like trying to beat a game without passing level 1. He didn't have the basics, and so he didn't know how to treat people properly. How could he be a good dad or a good partner or a good friend when his family was thoroughly dysfunctional and the only example his parents set were bad ones? With adulthood came a sense of impermanence that he wasn't ready for. Logan believed he wasn't made for the world, and that was a fairly correct assessment. He saw life as knights on horseback, as he himself said. His vision was unrealistic beyond comparison, and thoroughly unattainable for him especially. He wanted to be loved and respected, but to such an extent that it made him a pushover. During Season 1, I felt that Kendall had the most business sense of the kids. He'd spent the most time in the family business after all, and he actually knew a fair bit about how stuff worked. The problem is he had no idea how to actually run things because he lacked adaptability. He had such a high expectation of what things would be like with him at the top job that he couldn't actually deal with it when things went south. Whenever Kendall is given the opportunity to act without some authority hovering over him, he chokes because he lacks the self-confidence to face his problems head-on. Unconditional love teaches you to be comfortable with yourself, but since Kendall didn't have that, he wanted to be someone else. He couldn't accept that he was a nepo baby and that people didn't necessarily care about him for him, and that lack of acceptance stifled and killed his killer instinct. Logan had this conviction and force of will that manifested regardless of what position or situation he was in, but his son didn't even have the resolve or the courage to be himself, so how could he ever be the killer or the guy that his dad was? His escape from disappointment and self-loathing was drugs. Ironically, when he was on drugs, he was actually at his most likable and relatable to the people around him, because he wasn't putting up a mask. He wasn't bullshit for once in his life. The heartbreaking thing for me is that Kendall comes so close to separating his real self from the drugs. When he breaks down at the end of Season 3, he recognizes that he's not as good of a person as he thought he was, but as he's fighting through that realization and that understanding, he's pulled back into the company and all of its nonsense. He isn't given time to find a healthy way through that realization, and so he doesn't try to fight it. Season 4 Kendall is pretty generally and completely aware of what he is and how he got to where he did in life, but he also isn't strong enough to fight against his flaws as a person. The only way he learns is through failing, only this time his failure leaves him broken. There's no restart button for him anymore because his dreams are shut forever, and there is no one he can fall back on without him. His siblings hate him, his mom can't help him, his kids don't like him, and his ex-wife is gone. Most importantly, his crutch is gone. As much as he hated Logan, he loved him so much more. The relationship they had was a competitive one, like a lot of dads do with their sons, just in a much, much more toxic form. Whether it was trying to surpass him or be him, Kendall's life wasn't really his own, it was his dad's. The final scene of the show is him staring at the water from behind a railing. Whereas just a couple of episodes, he was in the waves, feeling like he was on top of the world. He's now locked out forever. The twist is that he could have stayed out there if Logan had let him find his own path. If he hadn't been encouraged to be himself, perhaps Logan could have actually found the worthy successor that he wanted. But because Logan wanted to manipulate his 7-year-old kid and ensure that he wouldn't be a disappointment like his eldest son Connor, he ironically ended up ruining his chances of getting the successor that he kind of wanted. Like all the kids, Kendall could have lived a much more personally successful and fulfilling life had he just been encouraged to be himself. And that's what hurts so much. Sure, Kendall's still rich at the end of the day. He walks out of the finale with a $2 billion payout, but because he's so starved of the fundamental things which humans need, no wealth can satisfy him. He's destined to be haunted by his failure for the rest of his days, and only comforted by piles of money he doesn't even really want.